one of the most significant things about this church, besides the stained glass windows, are the 8 big statues that dominate this church. These statues commemorate people who lived in this parish. The one thing they have in common is that they were all martyrs. Otherwise, there was very little association between each one of them. They span about 60 years altogether, John Houghton being the first in 1535 and St Anne Line being the last in 1601. When you look at the martyrs honoured in this church, there are so many aspects to consider. There are present representatives from the kingdom as it was then, of England, Wales and Ireland, persons from both the clergy and the laity, with a teacher and a boatman, opposite ends of the social scale. There was no class of Catholic that was unaffected by this Reformation. When you enter the church, on the left you will see a statue of Blessed Edward Jones. Blessed Edward Jones was a Welshman who as a young man travelled throughout Europe and converted from an Anglican to a Catholic. He studied for the priesthood at Douai and was ordained at Lune in June 1588. Later that year he returned to England and took up residence in a grocer's shop on Fleet Street. Standing beside him is the statue of the Irishman John Roche. Directly opposite the statue of John Roche is Margaret Ward. These were the 2 people who helped Father William Watson escape from Bridewell Prison. Bridewell Prison was once a palace. It had now become the most notorious prison in London, where public floggings took place twice a week. Father John Gerard spent some time there before he was moved to Clint Street Prison, a move he described as moving from hell to heaven. Margaret Ward was known as the Pearl of Tyburn. She had heard of the sad plight of Father Watson and often visited him to support and care for him. Her visits became so familiar that the guards failed to search her, and she was able to smuggle a rope into the prison. Portraits of Margaret Ward often show her carrying a rope. Sadly, the rope provided by Margaret Ward was too short, requiring Father Watson to make a tremendous leap, resulting in him injuring himself. John Roche managed to exchange clothes with the priest, who still managed to make his escape, leaving John Roche to be captured. It did not take too long for the authorities to work out who had provided the rope. Margaret Ward was sent to Bridewell Prison, where she was questioned under torture, suspended from the ceiling by the wrists, weighed down with manacles, with her feet barely touching the ground, and flogged. Margaret Ward and John Roche next met on the scaffold at Tyburn on August 30th, 1588, where they were hanged with the priest and 4 other laymen who were all hanged for helping priests. To the left of the statue of John Roche is the statue of Anne Line. William Shakespeare actually wrote a poem about the death of Anne Line. We do not know if Shakespeare was present for either the execution or the burial, but we do know from his poem, The Phoenix and the Turtle Dove, that commemorates her burial, that he was moved to pity by Anne's death. Anne is the phoenix of the poem, representing immortality, while her late husband, Roger Line, was the turtle dove, representing fidelity. Beauty, truth and rarity, grace in all simplicity, here enclosed in cinders lie. Death is now the phoenix nest, and the turtle's loyal breast to eternity doth rest. Leaving no posterity, 'twas not their infirmity, it was married chastity. Truth may seem but cannot be, beauty brag but 'tis not she, truth and beauty buried be. To this urn let us repair, that are either true or fair, for these dead birds sigh a prayer. It has often been mooted that William Shakespeare was a closet Catholic. Many scholars point out that in this poem there are many Catholic references. Other scholars would disagree. Regardless, isn't it lovely to think that William Shakespeare, the Bard of Avon, the world's greatest writer, may have written a poem about an English Catholic martyr. The last statue on the north side of the church is that of John Houghton. He was prior of Charterhouse, which is only a few minutes' walk from St. Etheldreda's. However, the seclusion of the Charterhouse from the world did not shield him from the situation that had developed between Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. The prior of Charterhouse wielded a lot of influence. If Henry VIII could persuade him to sign the Act of Supremacy, then others would surely follow. However, as his sayings displayed on the walls of the crypt of Tyburn Convent bear witness, this man was going to follow his conscience, even if it cost him his life. On the 4th of May 1535, he was taken on a hurdle to Tyburn, with 2 other priors and 2 priests, all of whom had refused to take the oath of supremacy. They were dragged from the Tower of London to Tyburn, and all of them were hung, drawn and quartered. The arm of John Houghton was nailed to the door of Charterhouse as a reminder to the monks who remained there. The martyrdom of St. John Houghton marks the beginning of the brutal killing of Catholics that was to last for the next 150 years. On the opposite wall, close to the altar, are to be found the statues of Swithin Wells and Edmund Jennings. Although these men never really knew each other, they both played an important role in each other's deaths. Ironically, these two met for the first and last time on the scaffold. Swithin Wells was a schoolteacher and a well-known recusant. His house was being continually watched. However, this did not deter him. Edmund Jennings was not born a Catholic. At the age of 16, he went to London and entered the drapery trade with a family of staunch recusant Catholics, where 3 sons later on became seminary priests, and the father died in prison because of his faith. Under the family influence, Edmund became a Catholic, and soon afterwards secretly went to the English College at Reims and was ordained in 1590, having obtained a special dispensation because of his young age. He returned to England and tried to make contact with his family. Sadly, his parents had died. He met his only elder brother and, to his great dismay, discovered that he was fiercely anti-Catholic. One day, as Edmund Jennings was walking in London, he met Polydore Plasden, a fellow priest from the English College. They arranged to celebrate Mass at the home of Swithin Wells the next day. While celebrating Mass, the house was raided by Richard Topcliffe and his priest hunters. Those at Mass resisted strongly, and it was finally agreed that Mass could continue, and after which Richard Topcliffe and his priest hunters would be allowed to enter. The priests, Mrs. Alice Wells, and the servants were arrested. Swithin Wells was absent at the time. When he returned, Swithin Wells was arrested and thrown into Newgate Prison. He was tried and found guilty of harbouring priests, and on December the 10th, 1591, a scaffold was erected outside his home. Swithin Wells was hanged, but only after he was forced to watch the brutal live disemboweling of Edmund Jennings. Edmund Jennings was the youngest of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. His anti-Catholic brother, full of remorse, became a priest and went on to re-establish the English province of Franciscans. As for Mrs. Alice Wells, Swithin's wife, she spent 10 years in prison before she died. However, their daughter went on to become a nun. Polydore Plasden was executed at Tyburn on the same day. It was said that Richard Cotcliffe raced across London so that he could witness both executions. The 3 servants from the Wells household were also hung at Tyburn that day. The final statue is that of John Forrest. John Forrest occupies a unique position among the martyred priests of England during the Reformation. He was the only priest to be burnt at the stake. Well, to say he was burnt at the stake is very much an understatement. He was actually roasted alive. John Forrest was a Franciscan friar. He was the Franciscan provincial in England and also confessor to Catherine of Aragon, who belonged to the Third Order of Minor Friars. His outspoken defence of the marriage of Henry VIII to Catherine of Aragon and his defence of papal supremacy incurred the wrath of the king and landed him in prison for treason under the sentence of death, which was never carried out. However, a case of heresy was prepared against him by 2 apostatized bishops, Hugh Latimer and Thomas Cranmer. As bishops, they did not have the power to charge John Forrest for treason, so they charged him with heresy for denouncing the king's supremacy over the Church of England. The penalty for heresy was to be burnt at the stake. His execution was to be a grand event. While John waited for the fire to be prepared and lit, Latimer preached a sermon lasting almost 2 hours, encouraging John Forrest to recant. Moreover, there was a special ingredient added to the fire. During the dissolution of the monasteries in Wales, a statue of St. Derfal Gerdard, a 6th century Welsh saint, had been discovered and brought to London. This was a huge wooden statue and required 6 men to carry it. There was a prophecy about this statue that said one day it would burn down a forest. John Forrest, a forest. The pun was not lost on Latimer or Ridley. The statue was placed on top of the woodpile. John Forrest was hanged in chains over the fire, and when it was set alight, he slowly roasted to death. According to reports, he took 2 hours to die, and 10,000 people turned up at Smithfield to watch this barbaric spectacle.
As you walk through the church, you see these statues looking at you. And they remind you not of something that's happened in the past, but something that is happening today. Because if these people had not offered their lives, then we would not be here today. As we conclude our visit here to St. Etheldreda's, one of the most abiding thoughts should be, there are 8 martyrs venerated here. You will find very few parishes anywhere in the world with so many martyrs who are totally unconnected. They all lived in this parish in the area here, and they all died because of the faith that has been here for hundreds of years.